Welcome back to Seasmith. With winter in full force, we had another slight weather window on the cards, so loaded the rods, grabbed some bait and headed down to Sundancer. Motoring out to sea, it wasn't long before we had some timely reminders of the ferocious storms we've had roll through over the last few weeks, leaving me feeling thankful that the only thing I'd lost out on was a few fishing trips. Feeling optimistic and confident we'd be rewarded for braving the conditions, it wasn't long before we were into the fish.
Ow. Sorry, mate. Like me.
There we go. Not bad. Of course, the first cast, the rod's only been in for like 5 minutes, hasn't it? As you can tell from these clips, the wind was horrendous and nearly ruined this video. Unfortunately, I'm still filming from my phone after that incident with my GoPro this summer. Anyway, the phone doesn't do it justice, but the sea state was really choppy. Nothing overly dangerous, but it did make for a wobbly day's fishing. The optimism and good fishing continued, however, with this whiting hopping aboard the boat for a little tour. I've quietened this clip as to not deafen you with the wind noise. Don't worry, I'm not saying anything important, just looking at how these fish have funny teeth. And just like mackerel of the winter, it wasn't long before my mum picked up her first ting of the day. And it's a very entertaining way of fishing this, because when you're dragging the weights across the bottom, your rod tips will constantly be banging like that and you'll think you've got bites on. But what I've done on this is I've got I've got these on a really light drag. So if something does pick it up, then I'll know because I'll kind of take it and go. And these are both on sliding ledger rigs as well, so it's going to be a bit easier for that to get noticed. But what you can do, if you've got one rod and you're paying attention to it, is tighten your drag up real tight, and then you'll know if the fish has taken it, because you're constantly moving away from your bait and the fish won't necessarily be doing it, and then your rod tip will bend over. But you need to keep an eye, because obviously then your rod can follow the fish, which you don't want. Well, not a target species, but very welcome indeed. The bass. Great size one. Probably just on the limit of maybe keeping some bass fillets in the freezer. But yeah, I was reeling in some of the ragworm actually, just to check the baits, and this took it right near the surface. Yeah, cracking fish. Great to catch. Here we go. Although we did land some decent bass on that first drift, the aim was to catch some flatties. But with the sea state declining and my mum's seasickness getting even worse, we decided to head further inshore and set the anchor to see what we could find. Move spots, now sat at anchor a little bit more inshore. We thought we'd see what takes the baits. Oh. The only thing that seems to be taking any of the worm at the moment is the little whiting. Small one. So by this point, the optimism had completely run out. I was soaked through from the sea spray. Apart from the odd small whiting, the bites had turned off. My mum had thrown up at least 10 times, and I'd even managed to get a line wrapped around the propeller whilst at anchor. So we decided to call it quits and head back in, empty-handed of any flatfish. home now. Well, things didn't go to plan, did they? I was hoping to target some flatfish, maybe get into a few wrecks, and spend the whole day out there. In fact, the whole time I actually spent fishing was around probably, well, we had one big long drift over the sand, which is where we caught some of those bass and the whiting. I am pleased with the bass actually, that was a good result. It wasn't the target at all, but you know, worms do catch a lot, and bass is one of those species that they catch. But yeah, I really wanted to catch some flatfish. I had set up my rigs and my rods for some flatties, gurnards, that kind of stuff. A lot of the things, the creatures that exist along the bottom of the sand, of the seabed along the sand there. Feels like unfinished business. I'm gonna have to look for another weather gap to try and get out there and achieve that. Yeah, weather-wise today, it wasn't too bad. It was rocking and rolling, but obviously my mum, you know, she started throwing up constantly. Her seasickness really got hold of her, so we couldn't stay out and we had to come back a bit early. But I'm in the garage now, about to give everything a wash down, put back some of the baits, refreeze what I can, sort through that. Always do try and give your gear, you know, your reels, your rods, your lures, whatever, a bit of a rinse down, especially when you're fishing in seawater, in salt water, because they do rust and they do corrode quite aggressively sometimes if you leave them, especially kind of, I bring my rods in during winter, or I have been bringing them in during winter, because I don't like leaving them out in the kind of icy cold garage where it's a bit damp and a bit, you know, minging. A lot of my like lures and clips and swivels and whatever, they kind of live out here, so I don't want them getting just moist and rusty out there. So I'm going to give them a wash down, dry them down and put them away. So what I do want to do is talk you through what my tactic was in terms of fishing for flatfish, or fishing the sand, I guess, along the seabed. What my approach was, what my rig was, and how I went about it. There's a few different ways. I'm sure there's lots of people out there that will have done this differently, but this is how I found to have success. You know, the last time I went out doing this as well with these rigs, they did work well. We were catching place. We just didn't have the time really to fish them properly today. So what I've got is this is just one of my little like spinning rods. I only have really 3 rods that I use actually. I've got one big boat rod, and then 2 little spinning rods really. This is my main line here. Let me get that in frame a bit better. So this is my main line, and I've got a sliding leisure weight, just going up and down. Now, you can get all sorts of different types of weights and stuff. You can get like ring weights and all sorts of different shapes and sizes. I don't have those. What I do have though is lots of these little weights, and I put one on and it kind of works fine, but this weight with these, I don't even know what weight these are. They don't actually say on the side of them, but these weights seem to be a good weight for drifting them along, or drifting the boat with these bouncing along the seabed. Kind of keeps it nice and planted without getting too dug in, doesn't kind of pop up and then get carried away in the tide. Even if the boat is drifting at around, today we were drifting at around 1 to 1.5 knots, which is pretty ideal I find for this types of fishing. And it kind of keeps them nice on the sand, without too low or too high. Now the reason I got 2 on there is 1, because it felt like a nice weight with the 2 of them on there, but 2, it's a bit more surface area. So if you think when these are bouncing along, they're banging along like this, they're causing a lot of commotion, a little bit more disturbance, a little bit more sand. Whereas 1 like that, it would still cause, you know, disturbance and sand and stuff, but not as much as 2 where they clang like this. They make a bit of noise, I'd imagine, when they kind of like rattle. So I find those to be really good, and that's just kind of what I've stuck with. I've got them both set up like that on both rods now, to the point where I purposely do it rather than just having it because I don't have a weight that is the right weight for that. Moving down then, onto the trace line. So I've got a blood loop that I've cut, so it's so coming off sideways, loads of beads, a little spoon which I think does have has a rattle in it, and then ending in an Aberdeen hook. That one of these is a size 1 and one's a size 2 hook. That's normally kind of the size hooks you want for kind of flatfish and that kind of stuff. But for the size of ones that we have around here anyway, on the south coast of the UK. And as you saw in the video, these hooks still they've taken gurnards, they've taken bass, they've taken whiting, pouting, kind of, you know, all other species that you'll find down there. these hooks are fine for. So that's my recommendation, what you'd go for. And then moving down, just at the bottom here, I've got another spoon, a few more beads with another hook at the end there. So yeah, that's my rig. I've got that rig set up on both, and it definitely works. It definitely has caught flatfish for me, it's caught Gurnard for me, it's caught, as we saw today, the bass. And yeah, it's just a really nice, kind of quite a versatile hook as well, rig I find. One thing to point out is when I tie the, so this is fluorocarbon, this is just, I think, 30-pound fluoro, which is pretty much what I use with all my rigs. I use 30-pound across the board, unless I'm kind of going out to wrecks and stuff, or something, you know, targeting. Most of my fishing I do off 30-pound, just standard for me. But when tying these hooks on, because I'm mainly fishing with worm, I'll thread the worm onto the hook, and I leave, hoping you can see that all right, that little tag in there, just leave that on, because what it means is when you thread the worm on, thread it down the line a little bit, that tag end will stick out a tiny bit, and just kind of secure the worm onto the hook and to the line there. Stops it kind of flowing back down and falling off, which I've had happen lots of times before I did this, but that kind of that cements it on really well. Not cements it, but you know what I mean. And yeah, just to comment on then the approach that I fish these with, these rigs. So I tend to cast them out off the side of the boat, let the boat drift, not an anchor or anything. I've got quite lucky where we are, that it's very, as soon as you come out into the bay around Christchurch, it's very flat, very sandy for a long expanse. So you can drift for ages, to be honest. I think actually the drift that we did today was about an hour long before we needed to kind of then reset or rethink about what we were doing and where we were. But yeah, typically have the boat drifting along, cast the rod out a little bit, you know, just so the line is nicely laid out, let it sink to the bottom, let the weight hit the bottom, feel the weight on the bottom, and you'll see, as we saw in the video earlier, the rod tip just slightly bouncing along. That's going to be kicking up the sand, kicking up the disturbance. Your spoons will kind of obviously be spinning along and rattling away, and that's going to create a visual presence on the seabed, which will attract Gurnards, flatfish, that kind of stuff. They are visual predators, so they'll see it, they'll hear it, they'll sense it, they'll then find your worms, and that's the plan, to try and catch the fish. But yeah, next for me is to get back out there the next weather window I can. I will say this has been my first full season of proper sea fishing where I've committed real time to it, you know, started to commit some money into like actual proper rods and reels and setups and stuff. And yeah, I fished through all kind of the spring, the summer months, autumn, and now through into winter. And I feel like summer fishing, I achieved a lot. I learned a lot of different species and conditions and summer fish and all that kind of stuff. Winter seems to be a little bit more difficult, I'm finding, for myself anyway. You know, trying to target some of the species that I want to in winter, still haven't figured out yet. A few different marks that I want to try and try a few different approaches. But I'm keen to get out there when weather permits. And I think maybe that's the difficulty. There's just a bit less time to fish in the winter because you're kind of looking at weather conditions a bit more. There's less opportunity to get out there and try different, you know, it's just less time on water. More time on water you have, the more fish you'll catch normally. So in my experience anyway. But with that being said, I will be back out there very soon, hopefully with some target species caught. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed that one. I hope you learned a little bit more about kind of the approach and just how I like to do it. If you've got any tips or how you like to fish for flatfish or any of the species that we've looked at today or in the last video actually too, then let me know below in the comments. But for now, until next time.